The game of football has always been associated with team sport, but also some personal accolades. Today, Timothy P. Brown of Football Archaeology takes us on a route of the history of handing out the game ball. Tim's coming up in a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And it is Tuesday, and football archaeology is on my mind. And we have the founder of that great website, Timothy P. Brown, with us. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren, this should be an awarding podcast to participate in.
An awarding podcast. You're segueing into our subject, I think, and we're going to find out a little bit more of that. Your title of your tidbit that you had just a few months ago, or maybe a few weeks ago, is A History of Game Balls. And
yes,
pretty broad topic, but it sounds like you have some direction for us on that.
Yeah, well, so I took a very narrow view in this case of game balls, more in terms of the awarding of the game ball, the game ball being, trophy value, kind of a game ball. But, I kind of started that article talking about, for an NFL game, at least nowadays, there are 36 balls prepared to be part of the game. So 12 submitted from each team. And then I think each team also submits 6 kicking balls, right? And so, I'm sorry, the kicking balls come directly from Wilson. Because the league, too many people are manipulating the kicking balls, and so they get those directly from the league. The teams do get a chance to massage them and whatever beforehand.
And if Tom Brady's playing, then 4 of them have to be at 8 pounds.
That's right. Well, so the inflate gate thing is a whole other story. But the game ball, one of the coolest things about I published that article on March 29th. And since then, I have uncovered a whole other slew of information that tells me that I was wrong, or at least, that I didn't find as early information as I thought I had. So at the time I was saying, look, the game balls, that whole awarding of game balls at the time that I wrote it, as far as I could trace it back to, was like 1886. When, it was mentioned in an article about a Princeton commencement, ceremony. And they were mentioning that the game ball from the game that they had played when they had beaten Yale was on the rostrum or whatever, for commencement. So it kind of tells you how important, what the football game was to those guys. But because of another path of research that I'm doing, I was trying to dig into, what all is, what all's going on, or kind of the background of game balls, and part of it was that for a long time, like from when American football began, and to my liking, it began in 1876 with the IFA. The funding of the IFA. When American football first got started, they only used one ball per game. That was it. Rain, shine, snow, sleet, whatever. They played with one ball, and those balls weren't anywhere near as, the leather wasn't as well protected, etc., as they are now. So these balls get waterlogged. And in the days of drop kicking, you drop it on the ground and the thing would barely bounce off, So, but then as the forward pass came in, into favor, then in 1917, they allowed the referee to decide on a wet day if he would allow a second ball to be used for the second half. And then eventually, things spread. But, so there was this whole thing of, you played with one ball. And so then this whole tradition developed around awarding or presenting the game ball to the victor. So, back in the day, the home team provided the ball, and then if they lost, the right thing to do was to award the ball to the visiting victorious team for them to then go back and paint the score on it or whatever, put it in the trophy case, whatever they were going to do with it. And so that was the tradition, for some time. And so then, since then I found out a couple of new things. So one was that I recently acquired a copy of a book called The Gilbert Story, which is a story of the Gilbert firm, which is one of the two main cobblers and rugby ball makers in Rugby, England, where the rugby school was. And they're still the primary provider of rugby football, rugby balls for like the World Cup and those kinds of things. So anyways, I got a copy of their ball, and it goes back through the history. And they talk about at the rugby school, there was a tradition of having two balls available for each game, and they got switched at half. But then I got a hold of Tony Collins, who, has been on this podcast. And if anybody hasn't heard that one, that is, a fabulous podcast to listen to because of Tony. But in any event, and he basically confirmed that, that rugby never really had the tradition of multiple game balls. So it was a rugby school thing, but it didn't spread to rugby more generally. They didn't really have a one ball or two balls, or they didn't really have a standard. So somehow in the Americas, this one ball tradition came about. And then it turns out that an earlier awarding of a game ball came about when, I think most people are aware that Harvard played McGill in 1874 in a rugby match. And that is really what led to Harvard playing rugby, and which is what led to American football developing from rugby. Well, in 1875, maybe the second, and 1876, there was an all-Canada team that played 3 games against Harvard. And in one of those games, all Canada, they lost all 3. All Canada lost all 3 to Harvard. In at least one of those games, they awarded the ball to Harvard. So that then becomes, at least best as I can tell so far, the first awarding of a game ball in at least the football tradition. But the fun thing about that is that, there just weren't a lot of rugby balls hanging around in the US because people weren't playing it, but, they were starting to make that transition. So, the IFA meets in November 1876, and they agree to play rugby instead of, whatever soccer and other games that they were playing. And so the weekend after that meeting, Princeton was the home team for a game against Yale, but they didn't have a rugby ball, and yet they were supposed to play under rugby rules. So somewhere in that whole process, Harvard gave Princeton this ball that all Canada had given them, and then Princeton loses, so they give the ball to Yale, and that ball now sits in a trophy case at Yale in their gymnasium. So, it's just kind of cool that it's literally probably the first game played under the IFA rules, IFA rugby rules. So in my mind, it's the first real football game. And yet that ball is still around, sitting in a trophy case at Yale, because it was the game ball. So I just think it's just kind of a cool, kind of the way this whole story ends up, that the game ball tradition preceded American football, because the Canadians are the ones that, gave it to the, started it as far as we're concerned. And yet that first ball is still around, sitting in a trophy case at Yale. I just think that's, for me, there's something magical about that.
Now that you say that, you make something a tour of that I took of Yale probably about 10 years ago makes some sense because I had the opportunity to with my wife's cousin was an assistant coach at Yale, and I got to tour the Yale Bowl and the locker rooms and just see all the tradition and the Walter Camp sort of, like, it's not really, it's a monument, I guess. It looks more like a facade to the White House, front of the White
Yeah,
House. But I got to see that. But we also got to go through the gymnasium you're talking about with all
yeah,
the halls of trophy, and it's a very great place. And there's one ball that really stood out that just didn't look like a football at all, and very tattered, old, you could tell. And I wish I would have took a photograph of it because that's probably that ball that you're talking about.
yeah. So I mean, let me describe the ball to you. I've not seen it myself, but I've seen images of it. So it is a classic melon ball. I mean, it is
Mhm.
almost round, and there's a big silver plaque embedded into the ball now. That basically tells the story of, hey, this is awarded by the all Canada team. We gave, it went from Harvard to Princeton, Princeton to Yale, and now it sits here. So I think I put the link in, I've added a postscript to the story, on the website. And I think I have a link to it because I found it on a site called is it College Antiques? But anyways, there's another guy kind of went through this whole thing, which is where I kind of picked up on this story, and then I found other stuff on it. But anyways,
Yeah.
I think it's just
Yeah.
a cool story, and to my knowledge, the oldest existing ball in American football.
Yeah, I mean that's a awesome story, and I didn't realize it went back that far of exchanging that game ball. Now, wasn't there sort of in that era and all the way up into the maybe early 20th century where teams didn't have but one ball? Because I could recollect there's a story I think of the big game Stanford and Cal, like a 1901 or 1902 game where they forgot to bring that one ball to the game. The
Yeah,
home team,
yeah,
the visiting team didn't even bring a game ball. It was only the home team had that one game ball.
yeah. And I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember the story. And I think you're right about Cal Stanford. And so it was one of those things where like they sent people into town to go get one,
Right.
and they couldn't find one. And the same thing happened with when McGill visited Harvard in 1874. They didn't bring a rugby ball. I guess they thought, Harvard would have one, but they didn't. Harvard just had a round ball. So they played the first game under Boston rules, which is somewhat rugby-ish because you could carry the ball. And then they played the second game under rugby rules, but they used a round ball. So yeah, and there's a whole other thread that I'm working on about. There was a thing called the American ball, which, best as I can tell, is actually developed by Charles Goodyear. He probably created the first one because he created vulcanized rubber. It was like a canvas ball that was kind of covered with vulcanized rubber canvas ball that was inflated. I don't think it had a separate bladder. Um, but so a lot of the round balls that people used in America in the 1860s and 70s were these American balls. So it
Hmm.
may be even that the Harvard Princeton or that Harvard McGill game, they could have played with an American ball, and then also even like the Princeton Rutgers game, or games in 1869, those were played with a round ball. It could have been an American ball, and that's what everybody called it, the American ball, as compared to an association or soccer ball or a rugby ball.
Now that ball that Charles Goodyear invented, was it the color of it black?
I've seen descriptions of it being red
Okay.
and also black. So
Because I sit there and I know I have an old book on Walter Camp, and it starts off as him as a boy playing. He had a black rubber ball that he just kicked around the yard and
yeah,
kicked over his mother's clothesline into the clothes, and everything. And that's how he, trained to become a football player eventually. And I wonder if maybe that was one of those Charles Goodyear balls, because that would have been right around the time frame. I think vulcanized rubber was in the late 1830s. So probably
I think
1840s or
Goodyear
50s was probably the ball.
his stuff maybe a little bit later than that, but anyways, I think so. Basically, if it was leather covered, it is probably an association sort of ball. But even their balls were like it wasn't real. They didn't agree on a certain ball until 1872. So things are kind of it's kind of whatever you could get your hands on, frankly. Back in the day. And they had all kinds of different sizes. I mean, rugby, American, and association balls all came in like multiple sizes, in like 3-inch increments. And so, like, size number 5 had a 27-inch circumference. And so, if you think about one of the most popular balls in American football has been the J5V, and preceding that was the J5. Well, that J was the model. The Spalding model was a J, and before that it was a lily white rugby ball from England called a J. And the number 5 was the 27-inch circumference. So that J5 name goes all the way back to the beginning.
Okay. As soon as you said the number 5, I was going to ask you if it corresponded to the J5. So I'm glad you cleared that up.
Yeah. It's so the letter was the model and the number was the size, because they were selling size 2, size 3, size 4, 5, and 6. So like a 33-inch ball, 30 and 33-inch balls were, whatever.
Yeah, I know they don't do it with footballs anymore, the size, and now it's like junior and whatever pro and whatever, and FHS. But soccer balls still have their sizes on them. I know you have, like, my daughter, when she was playing, used a 4, and then I think the pros in high school and college use a number 5. So
it's the same. It's the same sequencing, and they're still junior footballs because my kids played with them, but I don't remember it being a number based system for identifying them. I think they just called it a junior, but whatever.
Yeah,
maybe they still use a numbering system.
Yeah, I have a junior ball right here, and I don't see a number on it. I have a Wilson TD, and I don't see a number on it, so it's just a Wilson TD Junior. Oh.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just one of those cool things about the old balls that here's something that carried on from literally from the beginning that we see every day and never think about. Oh, why'd they call it a J5? Well, that's why.
Yeah, fascinating, great stuff. Now, Tim, you have great stuff like this, a lot on your website and your posts. And maybe you could introduce the listeners who haven't heard or read you before, to how they can take part in what you're writing.
Yeah. So best thing to do is just go to footballarchaeology.com and, find the site, just subscribe. You can subscribe for free. There's a paid version as well. You can also follow me on Twitter and on Threads and on the Substack app. So, you can find me on any of those 4 methods, or just go out and search the site whenever you want to.
Well, great stuff as always. We really appreciate it. And it's really enlightening about the ball, and some of the history of it. And we really thank you for that. And love to talk to you again next week about some more great football history.
Very good. Look forward to it. Thanks.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.